My name is Stephen and this is my channel, Heart's Delight Exports. How's it going? We're back in the kitchen today and I'm cooking up something of a traditional Newfoundland dish. This might surprise you, but this is an old dish that was usually done for leftovers anyway. Is corned beef hash. Now I start off, let's get you looking in the right direction here. So in the frying pan I have about 2 onions. I typically have small onions, so you'll have to judge. This is a good amount of onion. What corned beef hash typically is leftovers. So I got some leftover potato there. That's not going to be enough, of course, but it's somewhere to start. I got some leftover turnip that we had the other night. Cooked more of than we needed, mostly because of this. Liliana loves these. She's got to have her carrots. Now this afternoon I had my wife cook up some extra mashed potato, just so I can be sure to have enough to do this. Now I had the onion in here cooking already for a while, a bit of butter, a little bit of oil to keep it from burning too much. I'll actually turn up the heat a little bit there now. And I put a little bit of garlic into it. Now depending on where you're from and what your tradition is, maybe your potatoes would be chunky potatoes, you know, boiled whole or in quarters, maybe something of that nature, and not mashed potato like this. So it varies on depending on region, where you're from, what you're used to. Now the next thing is to get a can of corned beef. Now back in the day, my grandparents' time maybe, or definitely my parents' time, corned beef like this would have been considered cheap. Probably would have got it relatively cheaply, all things considered, versus fresh meat, of course. So you'd pay very little for a can of corned beef like this. Down there good. The can is literally full of corned beef. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to fry up all the potatoes and everything first, and then when I'm ready, I'll hook out this. Actually, I'll get that out and onto a cutting board now. When you get your corned beef out of the can, there's not much left, a little bit fat. Generally, corned beef was considered waste product. Ground up beef and a bit of fat put in a can. Generally not overly well thought of, but I guess as time went by and nostalgia kicked in, suddenly people were remembering things that they liked from their childhood and wanted it more, and brought it back in favor, sort of. And the price on it has actually gone up a fair bit, because now it's got to match criteria for prepared foods and stuff in the country. So over here on the cutting board, I'm just going to give this corned beef a rough chop. Not much to it. It's actually a very simple reason why you wait till the last minute to put your corned beef in the frying pan. Corned beef has no bone, it's been thoroughly ground, and basically has no consistency whatsoever. Once you start heating it up and mixing it with anything, it will nearly disintegrate. So the goal here is to give it the least amount of time in the pan as possible. Otherwise, you'll look at it and say, where the hell did the corned beef go? I don't see it. I spent $3 and $4 or $5 at times, $5 and $6 for this can of corned beef to put in here. I don't see it. I don't know what to do with it. So right now, I'll show you my pan again. Light isn't perfect, but that's the best I can do at the moment. So my potato mix is all frying up good. I'm not trying to crush anything. If the vegetables were chunkier, I wouldn't really worry about grinding them up or making them all the same consistency. None of that is really necessary. What I am trying to do is put a little color on it. Right here on the spoon, you can see this little bit is just starting to brown up. That's kind of what I'm looking for. This is a non-stick pan, so it takes a little bit to to kind of get something to brown up on here. But it is an old non-stick pan. So I did put a little bit of garlic into this. It's not a large amount. Most of the flavoring is going to come from the fried onions. Again, depending on where you're from, what you're used to for corned beef hash and stuff, this may or may not be sacrilege. But it's Newfoundland, so it should go over good with most people. This is a bit of Mount Sion Farms Pure Savory. As you can see on the label, Mount Sion Farms Savory. Savory is not to be confused with sage. No, you can't use oregano in place of it. Basil does not taste the same as it. Savory has a distinctive flavor all on its own. So just about there. I'm starting to get browning happening through most of the pan. Now, I have a bad habit of when I'm doing things, especially doing things for the camera, I don't let my hands sit idle enough. If I was not doing this for the camera, I would actually just smooth it over like this and I'd stand back and let it go. I'd give it a couple of minutes at least so that it would start to fry up and give me that browned up look that I want. It also adds a bit more crispiness to the potatoes, which is always good. So I got this on a just over medium heat, and I need to leave it for another minute, I'd say. And then I'm going to put the corned beef into it all last minute. I'll give the corned beef a couple of folding motions. I do have the corned beef chunked, so you can see it's about so big. Most likely what will happen as I fold this through the mixture is that it'll start losing its shape and consistency. Like you can tell here, corned beef will just crumble away to nothing. I'm not worried about some of it being cooked inconsistently because the corned beef is already cooked. And see, I got to scrape the bottom of the pan a little bit there. Starting to get a little bit more of that crispiness going. A little bit more and it'll be just right. Now what I am going to do when I get smooth this all over so I got more contact with the pan. So what I'm going to do, once I'm ready to put the corned beef in, I'm going to get a hole right here in the center of the pan, move everything out to the side, and make sure the beef gets really good contact with the pan really quickly. This should also, the corned beef will probably and should probably add a fair bit of salt content. So if you're worried about seasonings, you might want to wait till the end to make sure the salt content is right for you. And beware people snarfing corned beef off your board while you're waiting. If my daughter was here, she would definitely be eating that off the board. Now, because I'm going to be holding this for a little while, I'm not quite ready for supper. I want to get this ready, and I'm actually going to let it sit there for a little bit and let it cool just a bit. I got it chunked up. This comes out of the can as one big piece, and that's all there is. Right? Like, so to get it hot quickly, I'm going to make a bit of a tint out of the rest of the mash, rest of the hash, and I'm going to completely enclose the beef into it. That'll help. That'll get everything nice and hot, nice and quick. See if I can give you a different angle here. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this video. Important things to remember: leave your corned beef out of the mix until the last minute. Once the corned beef is in the mix, you don't want to move it around any more than necessary. Remember to take it off the heat so it don't brown up and burn up on you. That really ruins the taste if it gets a bit burnt. You want to not mix the corned beef through too much, like over and over again, just playing with it, because you will lose that distinctive beef chunk. The goal is kind of have individual flavors. If you mix it too much, you're just going to have one big flavor, which, if that's what you're looking for, you're good, no problem. It doesn't hold over the best, so if you're making too much and you're looking at the next day having it, it'll probably be all the one flavor. So before I go, I'm going to ask you a little bit of Newfoundland trivia. What are the 3 levels of Newfoundland pea soup? So back around the Depression, or maybe just a little bit after it, depending on your economic standing in the community, there would be 3 different levels of pea soup that your family might prepare. So if you were very wealthy, or if you were good enough off to have enough money to do it, you would use trimmed navel beef, or what we call salt meat, in your pea soup. It sounds fairly straightforward, but back in the day that was pretty expensive. If you were doing okay, but not quite really that well off to afford salt beef, you would have ham. And most likely it would be leftovers of ham from another meal, and cut it up and you're getting a second use out of it. So, good enough. You're doing a bit better, or not, you're not doing as good as the salt beef people, but you're trucking along there and you're making good financial decisions, kind of thing. But if you were fairly poor and couldn't afford either of those options, the most likely outcome was that you were having corned beef in your soup. It sounds kind of weird because, as I said in the video, corned beef, if stirred too much or if heated and manipulated too much, will go away to almost nothing. But it was cheap meat, and if you could do it, pea soup is a rather cheap meal. It could be very filling, and if you made enough of it, you can keep it going for a couple of days, so you can get several meals out of it. So what was the trick? The trick was actually rather simple. Right at the last minute, before the soup was made, it was completed, everything else was cooked in the soup, nothing else needed to be added. The corned beef would be taken out, diced up, and dropped in the soup. If you weren't making that much, it'd go right in the pot. Now, if you were really poor off, it's quite possible that you got a chunk or two of corned beef in your bowl, and then the soup was poured on top of it. Maybe you only got a chunk or two and you nursed that along. took all kinds of ways to survive. And some of the ways they're still handed down and treated as family heirlooms today. So there's another video for Hersty Light Exports. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it entertaining and perhaps a little educational. And I'll see you next time I'm working on something you might find interesting. Bye.